Now, bees have been very stressed out. There's a lot of problems with bees. They have a mite that kills them. You can see the mite, it's like a little black dot. You see it growing on the larvae of bees, and it sucks the life out of the larvae. It's horrible. And then the bees still will get born, so to speak, from the larvae state into the real bee state. But you can see they have stunted wings. They can't really fly. So that's one thing that's happening. And then there's another thing happening, and it's called CCD. And CCD means colony collapse disorder. And every year, 30 or 40% of the hives, they just die. They die or they disappear. Nobody knows where they go or what's happened with them. In ecoversity, we feel we have a role in keeping bees, in promoting pollination. In our particular case, we have a very special hive that we do it with. Normally, you've seen these box hives in the field. They have a little, frame, and there's a pre-made plastic comb in it, and the bees build on top of the plastic comb their nest or their cells. But we don't do it like that. We have a simpler box. We have just a box, and we have little slats of wood on top of the box, and the bees don't have a frame to build their own cells. They build everything themselves. They don't have a plastic frame to start with. So in a way, our bees are the closest we can get to having wild bees. The bees have a lot of choice in the way they want to build their hive. And what we have noticed is that the difference between the commercial hives and our hives is that there's actually very subtle differences in size of the cells that the bees make. And if there's very subtle differences in a sort of a wild hive compared to the commercial hive, you can imagine that there's very subtle differences in the bees themselves that are getting born and getting raised in one hive compared to the commercial hive. And if there is a subtle sort of differentiation within the hives, and you allow that to happen, then you can also imagine that actually the resistance of the whole hive to their environmental conditions will increase. And it's really significant to see that you see, this disease is spreading everywhere, but New Mexico is clear still. Yeah, maybe also having to do with the mountains or other things that protect New Mexico a little bit, but it's still significant. Bees have 15 glands that produce pheromones. And so pheromones are little chemical packages of smell, really, that are being picked up by the other bees. Each gland can produce 4 chemicals. And so all in all, the bees actually have about 60 chemicals to their avail to communicate with the other bees. If you think about that, and you think like, oh, wow, there's 60 different little chemical packages that they can vary in concentration, each one of them. That's very complex when you think about it. You think like, okay, it's a little bit like an alphabet. Yeah. And with the bees, you can imagine it becomes very complex too. We can understand the bees to some extent because we know that, if one of the bees stings somewhere, that the other bees get alerted. They kind of hear, or it's not hear, they smell what happened there. And they become aggressive because they realize that one of the bees felt the necessity to sting somewhere. They don't like to sting because they lose their life when they sting. But when they do sting, the other bees get alerted, and by that pheromone, by that smell, and we understand that very well because we see that the other bee is starting to swarm towards you and try to sting you in exactly the same place as the other bee has stung you. We have no idea about the subtlety of the language between the bees. We understand they're social animals, but how social they are, how they use their pheromones all the time to give each other messages. It could be as complex as our language, really. It could be. They have less to talk about, and they have more like, oh yeah, why, you know, I filmed. I like filming, and so I filmed the bees that we have, and well, you know, when you just look at it in regular speed, you see these clusters of bees coming and going and coming and going, and they make a zoom, zoom, zoom sound, right? A buzzing sound. And it's all very undifferentiated. Well, but if you slow them down to about 10% of their movement and 10% of their sound, suddenly a wealth of information reaches our sensory ability, because suddenly we can see that when they come down, then they walk slow because they only got 10%. They're looking at each other. They're saying hello to each other. They're going inside the hive, and they like, oh, and where have you been? Oh, I've been right there. We did it this way, and yeah, it was a lot of there was a lot of honey there, and you can kind of see that. Also, with the sound is really interesting. Whereas when we think about bees buzzing, right? But if you go to 10%, you hear a chorus that is kind of like a buzz. Still kind of like a buzz. But within the chorus, there are very distinct voices that sing like whales and weave their way through this chorus. Only then, only if you slow it down like that, does it become available to the human ear. Well, I'm interested in this because I think that if bees really have the subtlety of having about, 60 chemicals to their availability, and have to communicate with each other socially, that I can easily imagine that little chemicals that we humans put in the air all the time, our petrochemical civilization, basically interferes with the subtlety of the language of the bees. And that is one of the things that confuses the bees, and may very well be one of the causes of the colony collapse disorder, CCD.